Hello, I'm Kelly Lenvoy. Welcome to Arthritis at Home. Today we're going to be speaking to Dr. Janet Pope, Professor of Medicine in the Division of Rheumatology, University of Western Ontario. Dr. Pope is a leading researcher in scleroderma, lupus, and rheumatoid arthritis, focusing on outcome measurements, clinical trials, and disease manifestations. We also know mentoring is one of her passions, and she's involved in mentorship both for junior faculty in the Faculty of Medicine at Western and in rheumatology throughout Canada. Dr. Pope, welcome to Arthritis at Home. How are you?
Great. I hope you're doing well too, Kelly, and thank you for the kind words. And I'm doing arthritis at work right now, so same idea.
Well, that's interesting because that was a previous episode. We spoke to Dr. Diane Lakai about arthritis in the workplace and returning to work in the context of the pandemic. So very topical. And what we wanted actually to talk to you today about, Dr. Pope, is to help our viewers understand this race that's underway right now to find a vaccine for COVID-19. We're hearing more and more about it in the media. There's obviously a lot of high stakes involved here. There's a number of different programs that are underway. And I guess the first question on everyone's mind is, how long is this going to take? And we keep hearing about this 12 to 18 month time frame. Is that realistic?
So Kelly, I don't have a crystal ball. I wish I did, but what I can say with, I don't think we've ever had a time where pharma has collaborated so closely with other even competitive pharmaceutical companies, with governments and for grants to look in this area. So I don't do any research in basic science or vaccines, but what it does look like is that there will probably be at least 3 groups that will go into phase 2. Already one has, I think, or is about to, and 2 more coming. And phase 2 is not just, okay, does it look safe and you mount an antibody, but do the antibodies actually neutralize the corona COVID-2, the virus? Do the antibodies sustain over time? And is there still any safety signal? So I kind of think that even when a vaccine comes, the phase 3 trials will probably be rushed. Phase 2 or less people, phase 3 even more. But I believe that then, think how many billions of people are on this planet. There's no way everyone can get vaccinated quickly because they have to produce it, and also just the administration of it. But I have a feeling that it will come out high risk people that might really be medical personnel, the elderly, heart disease, diabetics, and then I think it might come to immune suppressed and others. So I imagine there will be a hierarchy. So 12 to 18 months is realistic. There will be a vaccine. It's not realistic, unfortunately, in my opinion, that will all be offered the vaccine once it's out, because there will be all these issues with it of production and the logistics of getting everyone vaccinated who should be and could be and wants to be.
We've also been hearing about this parallel research and development track around antiviral antibodies. What are they, and how do they differ from a vaccine?
So there's different ways that they're thinking of the antibodies. So if you got COVID-19, so if you got the illness, in general, a normal immune system, even a slight immune suppressed immune system, will make antibodies against it. And those antibodies are wondering, hey, could they put them in a critically ill patient the way, for some of our listeners, the way some people are on IVIG, which are pooled antibodies, pooled blood serum from people that have antibodies that might plug up your immune system. So we use IVIG as a, for instance, in severe dermatomyositis in some cases. So connective tissue disease, other people's antibodies to plug up your immune system. These would be antibodies that might actually help a critically ill, or in fact, might go into a person that's at risk of COVID, that, you know, bad lung disease or something, they might do better if they have a response. I don't think that's going to pan out for most people, that kind of approach. And we can understand why. You could probably only transiently get that antibody response, but not a long-term response, the way immunizing your own system to kind of get like a low version of the natural infection or the viral particle, the way the immunization might work. So antibodies right now aren't ready for prime time of administering one person's into another. Of course, testing that they don't have other illnesses that could make the next person sick, but also because they probably won't last long within the next person.
You mentioned earlier that there are, I think there's like 4 to 6 candidate vaccines right now that are in the race. I think some of our audience, and certainly we've been getting this question from ACE members, are wondering, why do we need more than one?
Well, first of all, some could fail, number one. Number two, there's going to have to be mass production. So having more people in the race means the possibility that, say, if 2 out of 4, 2 out of 6 are really kind of the home run ones, why not is one. Different manufacturers are fine, but also some people will have, say if it's made with egg, they don't really do vaccines anymore with egg whites, albumin, but they used to. If someone was allergic to that, if the other people do a recombinant one without that technique, maybe growing in E. coli, the other one's in egg whites, which they're not doing egg whites anymore, then you could have the option, oh, this person might be allergic. Or they might find in 2 years after the vaccine comes out, one of them gives longer protection, because the people in trials, they'll keep doing probably antibodies on them. Did they mount the response? Do they still look like they're immune? Is the virus mutating? Is that still going to be helpful? So these long-term follow-ups, you're probably going to need at least 2 or 3 manufacturers to know, does that guy better in the long term or this one? Because we're going to have school kids that babies being born over the next few years, that they're going to have to know, do they mount a response? Do they get vaccinated immediately? And does it one work better than another?
You referred that to the phase 1 trials where these candidates currently are. But we understand, obviously, there's phase 2, phase 3. What exactly is entailed in these different clinical trial periods?
Right. So first of all, whatever I say gets accelerated because of COVID. But a normal vaccine, phase 1 would be usually young, healthy men. By the way, the phase 1 that one of the companies did was anybody who wanted to. So old, young, medium, women, men, women of childbearing potential, the whole bit. So it wasn't even just young, healthy men, because is it safe? Do they safe, like they look at blood tests and they look at, do you tolerate it? Did you have a sore arm, a high fever? And then do you mount a response? You don't even know in phase 1 if that response is going to help to neutralize the virus. And we don't even later will know if the virus is mutating. So far, the virus, by the way, COVID-19 is not a big mutating virus. Thank heavens. That's really helpful for a vaccine. Then in phase 2, larger study, larger N, longer follow-up, and you're going to start looking ex vivo. If I take the blood of the vaccinated versus the placebo, or maybe even different doses of the vaccine or different schedules, do you neutralize COVID in the test tube or on the Petri dish better? So you start looking at blood and looking outside of the person's, their blood, they got vaccinated or they got a fake or a different dose. And then you look to see, does it actually neutralize the virus or do what it's supposed to do? And you look a little bit longer as well. Is that sustained, say, a couple months later? And for long-term safety, you want to know if it's working in the long term as well. So the phase 2 will be ongoing of some of these blood test things while phase 3 is underway. So one study already is in phase 2. They had the protocol, of course, ethics approval, government approval, all that. And that's one in the US. But there was another company right on their tail. And as I say, there's probably many more that I'm not fully aware of because it hits the news, but if it's in a non-English language, I'm not even going to know unless if, it hits our news saying, oh, in Russia or in China, this other group has found something. So phase 3 is a longer one, and it might not even be ethical in phase 3 to do a placebo control if it looks like it's safe. So maybe they'll do high dose, low dose, or 1 shot versus 3 shots. Hepatitis B vaccination, again, for the young kids. When I first got it as like an adult, it wasn't around when I was a kid, it was 3 shots, and now it's 2 shots, and almost no one has a 1 shot Hep B. There's a Hep A B that's combined, that's 2 shots. So they'll probably look at the frequency and probably ethically say, if we're doing all these people, do we have maybe even a 5-to-1 placebo, that for every 4 people on active drug, would 1 person be on a placebo instead of a traditional active versus placebo? And because people are volunteering their bodies, but they also want to get some benefit from it too, obviously.
And so the numbers involved in the phase 3 are quite a bit larger as well.
Yes, larger and longer and more comorbidities. It usually reflects the population a little bit more. But as I say, even the phase 1 of one study, I was kind of surprised that it wasn't like just young, healthy men. It was in Seattle, and they let kind of anyone that was of a consenting age participate if they wanted to, with ethics approval, all the right things.
Now, if you're a consumer and you hear about accelerated process and fast tracking, and does that mean we're kind of cutting corners? Is there any reason to be concerned that what would normally be a 5, 6, 7-year process is going to be shortened into 1.5 years? Are there any reasons for concern about safety and efficacy?
And that's a wonderful, like, it's a bang on question. You're hitting the hammer on the nail. So first of all, 1.5 years is our most optimistic, I think, anyway. But the corners that are being cut, in my opinion, so far, I'm going to talk about treatment in a second, but on vaccine, in my opinion, are the regulatory approval, the paperwork stuff is all, they have facilitated that it's fast tracked through FDA, through Health Canada, through in Europe, EMEA. So that it might take months when you put in your application, might take now days or weeks. So it's more some of the paperwork around it. They still have to do proper science. And I must say, as a researcher, some of the, retraction of 2 articles in a high level for treatment of COVID, the hydroxychloroquine articles, is very concerning. Peer review is probably not having due diligence, and there's a real rush to use treatment. So in fairness, a lot of treatment, even the registered studies, are not properly designed randomized controlled trials. It's like we're going to treat people 10 and report. But there are actual good trials that are adaptive design. If we have 5 options, and Canada is in this one of these many trials and is doing 2 treatment arms, then if they look like they're full, like meaning that they have enough data to analyze, then they'll do another treatment arm. So they're adaptive, or if it looks like this is very unsafe and worse than a standard of care, then they might close an arm off. So that's called an adaptive trial design, and that's done in intensive care units like more frequently now, but that was a study design from before. So there is good due diligence, but if something comes out too good to be true for any consumer, if it sounds too good to be true, shall I say more? It's too good to be true, right? So, but the corner cutting on vaccines, because this will be broadly applied to everyone, not someone in death's door in the intensive care unit, but everyone down the road. They won't cut the proper science corners, but the legislative, the process will get fast tracked. And I think that might be a way forward for even drug approvals for our patients down the road, if there's a huge unmet need and nothing to offer, like say the kids that have some of these febrile fever syndromes. Some things will go in fast track because there is nothing, there are now offering canakinumab, anakinra, but before there's nothing to offer. So some things get fast tracked from before too, fortunately.
Earlier you touched on manufacturing, deployment of the vaccine. Once it gets through the 3-phase trials and is approved, it then is going to be introduced to the marketplace. You talked about that hierarchy of who may get it first. I think that's really important because consumers are going to have to manage their expectations. And that is when it becomes available, for instance, in Canada, it's not going to be available to all Canadians at the same time. How will that what will that potentially look like?
Right. So I'm only now going on how I think of how a flu shot runs, right? So when flu shots, every, as our fall season comes and influenza, when that comes, the first that get it are the elderly, like the frail in nursing homes, some other people who might have severe comorbidities, like bad obstructive lung disease on oxygen kind of stuff, because the family docs have a hierarchy, and healthcare providers. Now, by the time, so we'll probably, I would guess that that might be the way it's rolled out, because you can't have your healthcare provider giving everyone else COVID. But maybe by the time the vaccine comes, because vaccines work by herd immunity. If you get people immune by a vaccine or by naturally having had the illness and not succumbed, if you get enough people immune, then other high risk people that aren't yet vaccinated, or it's not safe to do so, or they're allergic, or you didn't reach them, might not get the virus because everyone around them is immune, so they're not being transmitted to them. So herd immunity, you really have to vaccinate a large majority or have them had the exposure. When we talk about antibodies, there's also tests of an antibody test from your blood. Did you have COVID already since March on, or even before March? Because before we knew about the pandemic, there were some people that, freely moved from China to here or other countries that were at risk to Canada. And some people for sure got sick somewhere along the way, maybe even from last September, but for sure from Christmas time onward. So with that in mind, if we have a properly designed antibody test that says, oh, look at Kelly, you're immune and I'm not, I better get it because I'm a healthcare worker, and you don't need the vaccine because you're actually naturally immune, even though you maybe didn't get sick. So the problem with the antibody test right now is it has false negatives. Doesn't have a lot of false positives, but it has some false negatives. So if the antibody test is like flipping a coin 2 out of 3 times the antibody test is right, we have a problem, right? So they're also working on developing, are you immune or not? Because maybe that will allow people to travel and not have to be 2 weeks off work if they're in a high risk area when they come back from travel. Right? Traveling for any reason. If you work in a nursing home, you really probably can't enter that nursing home for 2 weeks if you've been at airports. So, it might allow better free flowing access. And then even the test itself, the nasal swab that everyone tells me is very painful because they're like ramming it right up nasopharynx, way up there. That swab, 2 out of 3 people who have it, that you really think have it, 2 out of 3 will test positive, but the third won't. So even our test is kind of a bit, I won't call it pathetic, but not operating as much as we'd like. We'd like more 9 out of 10 that really have it are positive, or 99 out of 100 that really have it are positive, because then you can use the proper precautions and okay, you people had it, so hopefully you're going to have immunity for a while. So we're not even there yet on our antibody test or on our swab, even though no testing is not appropriate for people that are at risk. They should be, if you think you have it, you can now in Canada go and get the test. But if your test is negative and you actually meet the criteria for having it, you had a friend that was positive that you encountered, or the hairdresser or whomever, somebody that you encountered and you were with them for more than an instant, people passing on the other side of the street aren't going to give it to you, as a for instance. But if you're at risk and you have cough and fever and or aches and cough, or maybe GI and headache and achiness, if you meet one of the criteria, because they change all the time, and you're tested negative and you think you have it, just act like you have it and be in isolation for 14 days. Even if the test is negative. So we have to come a long way on testing. But, at the beginning of March, we had almost no testing kits available. Now we have lots, fortunately.
There have been surveys or polls taken in Canada and the US. In Canada, I think it was about 20%, in the US up to 30% of respondents saying they would not want to receive the vaccine. We know there's an anti-vaccine movement across North America. in this particular instance, if you had 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 3 people saying they were not going to take the vaccine, what kind of impact would that have on us moving forward?
Right. So then we wouldn't have herd immunity. So then, like that chemo kit, as a for instance, isn't protected if it's unsafe to vaccinate someone, or the chemo adult, not just a kid, but someone whose immune system is super compromised, that it might not be safe because they won't mount a response, and you don't know the safety in that immune compromised person, and you don't know the effectiveness. All those people around them being vaccinated helps protect those vulnerable people. So if you have 1 in 3 or 1 in 5 that won't get vaccinated, refuse to be vaccinated, then we have a real problem. And it wouldn't surprise me, from my public health hat, that kids at school will probably have mandated vaccines, or they have to, that they're not coming. You can homeschool, right? Because it's legal to go to school. It's like it's mandatory when we're not in a pandemic. So you probably must be vaccinated too. And that's true for measles, mumps, and rubella, the boosters, diphtheria, polio, pertussis, and tetanus, and all those things. But I hope with greater understanding, people would understand why we would do it, because again, for most people, this is an annoying thing to have. It's like getting influenza, but the mortality rate of COVID-19 is probably 10 times that of influenza. So it's not inconsequential. Influenza probably has a mortality rate, again, we don't test everyone, but the sick ones get tested, probably has a mortality rate of 1 to 3%. COVID-19 has probably a mortality rate, as I say, of 10%. So this is not an inconsequential virus. And even though the highest risk are older, heart disease, diabetes, obstructive lung disease, that's a lot of people in our country. So I would hope that they'll change opinions over time with better PR, and also understanding, what does this mean, not just for you, but your community and your country.
Dr. Pope, I want to thank you for you taking the time today to help us better understand this race to vaccine. It's going to be an interesting next 12 months. Obviously, there's a lot of work to be done, and what we're already seeing as the summer approaches is that there are other new waves of infection occurring, and so it puts even more importance on this vaccine arriving as soon as possible, but without cutting corners. So thank you again, Dr. Pope.
And thank you, Kelly.
And thanks to you, all of our viewers. This is another episode of Arthritis at Home, and we hope you can join us again soon. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.